It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy. Back with Home Commander, back for another episode of Mosey Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the Commander for us on a budget. On my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. Plus, I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider doing all that YouTube stuff. I'd appreciate it. But this is our last video before we start Spider-Man content. I'm really excited to get there, but I thought I'd spend this week taking a look at some older commanders. And today, we're going to go back to Bloomborough and talk about Vren, the Relentless. A 4-mana Dimir Rat Commander, Ward 2. If a creature to opponent controls would die, we're going to exile it instead. At the beginning of each end step, so every turn's end step, we're going to make X 1/1 rat creature tokens with ability to grow for each of the rats you control, where X is the number of creatures your opponents controlled that were exiled this turn. So, Vren exiles our opponent's creatures that die, but its ability just cares about anything of our creatures that are opponents that were exiled. So, whether we destroy or exile our opponent's creatures, both of them are going to count for Vren. And so the game plan is pretty simple. Force as much removal, sacrifice, edicts as we can on our opponents to kill their creatures, make rats, and use our rats to take over the board. It's fairly incomplex in its idea. We want to be using efficient removal, especially removal that can remove as much as possible and take down our opponents. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want to see all the videos on our channel just a little bit early for just $1 a month, consider check that out down below to support the channel. Well, the deck cares about rats, so we're going to play rats, obviously. We're not just going to play Vren and 35 lands and a bunch of removal. There's a lot of great rats and a lot of rats that fit our game plan. Ashcoat's one of those cards that I think is great as a commander, and it's great on its own, giving all other rats you control +X till end turn, where X is the number of rats you control whenever it attacks or blocks. I really love this. I really love that Ashcoat helps your rats both attack and block, and that's a brutal buff because really, truthfully, all you need if this is going off is 1 or 2 rats to get through to get a lot of damage. You can mill on your end step and get some rats back if you want to, but I think Ashcoat's just going to really pair up with some of these other rats that we have in the deck to just hit hard. Caramonix gives all of our rats Toxic 1. Where Toxic 1 says if a creature would deal common damage to an opponent, they get an infect counter, or a poison counter. So unlike infect, where damage is dealt in poison counters, Toxic just says, oh, I hit my opponent, they get a poison counter. Of course, our whole goal of this deck is going to be to go wide, so this Toxic can help as another way to take our opponents out. Lord Skitter is going to make a rat on the beginning of each of our combats. This is, again, very nice, since these rats that Vren make care about the number of rats, other rats we control. So again, more rats equals bigger rats. Marinara can sacrifice a rat to make a bunch of rats. This is a huge deal because it's just going to exponentially increase the number of rats we control. Then giving them all fear makes them great because then they're harder to block. Ogre Stormlord gives them all Death Touch, which is really great, going to make them harder to block. Pack Rat is a star where star is the number of rats we control. And then for 3 mana, we can pitch a card and make a copy of Pack Rat. So here's a 1 mana or 2 mana creature that can make copies of itself and get more and more of them. But I think it's always fun to have some fun in a rats deck. So we're going to play some rat colonies. We're going to play 15 of them. Rat colonies are cards you can have any number of cards in your deck, and it gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. I think rat colony is going to be a nice alternate strategy in the deck, getting these rat colonies out and having them be a real threat to our opponents as Vren tries to do what it wants to do. Roaming Throne is going to double all triggered abilities of all rats we control once it comes down. Again, great for Vren because that bottom ability is a triggered ability, but there are some other rats in the deck that have triggered abilities, but mostly Roaming Throne is going to pair with Vren, right? Getting double the rats, right? And then Valley Rockcaller, whenever it attack, each opponent loses X, we gain X, where X is the number of other, and the key one we care about is rats. So each opponent loses X, we gain X, where X is the number of rats we control is a huge deal. Yes, Valley Rockcaller has to attack, and it's not going to get these buffs like these other rats, but I think the hope is that you attack with Rockcaller once, and that 10 or 12 life you chunk out is going to be more than enough, right, to really turn the tide in our battle. But okay, so there's the rats, and again, Vren makes rats. So how are we going to remove creatures? And the truth is, there's a lot of ways to do it. Liliana, each player sacrifices 2 creatures of their choice. Could be potentially up to 6 rats for our opponents. Remember that tokens are always going to be bad things for us, but if our opponent's playing other creatures, right, then we can take advantage of this. Crippling Fear, -3/-3 to all creatures that aren't rats, obviously. Curse of the Swine, just exiling X target creatures and they get boars for each creature exiled this way. It's important to note that we're not going to expect to nuke, 8 creatures every turn and get 8 rats on everybody's turns. It's about getting the most value we can at the right time to net these rats. Things like Innocent Blood. Everybody sacrifices a creature. Well, it is a sorcery, so it's going to happen on our turn, but again, that can lead to rats. Make an example. Each opponent separates the creatures they control into 2 piles. For each of them, we choose a pile. They sacrifice the creatures in their chosen pile. Again, so here's a way to basically just have our opponent's creatures, potentially, get a bunch of rats. Rush of Dread. We can have an opponent sacrifice half the creatures they control rounded up. Again, so pick the opponent with the most creatures, and hopefully you hit creatures that aren't tokens so that you can get more value. Season of Loss. Each player can force each player to sacrifice a creature. Again, hopefully we're just sacrificing one of our rat tokens, but they're sacrificing something really important. Swarmyard Massacre. You make a couple of squirrels, and then each creature that isn't an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel gets -1/-1 for each creature we control that are those types. So brutal board wipe. Same with something like Toxic Deluge, right? Try to knock out the whole board at once and try to get some value from them. Baleful Mastery and Infernal Grasp are single target removal. Flare of Malice forces each opponent to sack a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures they control. This is going to almost always, or should ideally almost always, hit an actual creature. So Flare of Malice should provide us with some rats that way. Snuff Out, again, single target removal. Shieldred's Edict and Liliana's Triumph are edict abilities, forcing our opponents to sacrifice something. And again, the hope is that they're sacrificing something non-token, depending on what our opponents have, again, to get us rats. The whole goal here, right, is to diversify removal to make sure we can hit anything that comes our way, but also makes us rats. Soul Shatter, everybody sacrifices a creature with the high or planeswalker highest mana value. Vonus Hunger, each opponent sacks a creature, but if we have the City's Blessing, half the creatures they control rounded up. Attrition just lets us pay black and sacrifice a creature to destroy a non-black creature. This is really nice because you could basically give up a rat to destroy something and you're just going to get a rat back, right, if Vren is out. I think it's important to just remember that we want to focus on getting Vren in and then removing things to make the rats and let the rats just take over the game, take over our board state. But no decks ever complain, and even though this is our second time around on Vren, I think there's a lot we have to learn going to testing. Do we need more mass removal, especially more one-sided mass removal? Things like Kindred Dominance, can help do that for us. We could play things like Raise the Palisade if you want to bounce our opponent's creatures back to their hand, but we almost would rather they die. So I think that the one-sided board wipes make more sense. You could also go into the Dictative Erebos. Great. I think we have Grave Pact in the deck, but you could also add in Dictative Erebos, forcing your opponents to sack a creature whenever our creatures die. Really kind of force that bad decision on our opponents. Do they want to take out something of ours and lose something of their own, or that turns those effects like Innocent Blood, where everybody has to sacrifice a creature, into everybody sacrifices a creature, we sacrifice ours, then everybody has to sack another one, right? And you can just start to see where that value can stack up, as long as you can hit multiple of your opponent's creatures in a turn. And then, I didn't really think about things like Phyrexian Arena for card draw. I think the deck has enough. We have some ways to do it. But we could probably look into more of it, especially, right, things like Reconnaissance Mission or Biden of Thassa. We do have a couple of those in the deck, but we could invest in more since we know we're going to have a ton of rats. The hope is they can hit our opponents so we can draw cards that way if we want to. Whether you choose that or something like Phyrexian Arena just to guarantee you the automatic extra draw, I think there's options for more card draw if you notice that your hand's just constantly running out, right? You have the pieces, you just run out of them in your hand. Well, let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what hands we're looking to keep and how we're going to set up. And we have to give a little bit of an asterisk caveat in this playtest in that I'm not going to know what my opponents have. Meaning that if I leave up a mana for a removal, spell, we're going to hope that we use it on the best thing we can and get a rat out of it. There's no way to simulate that, right? So we want to factor it in, But those are the things that playing at a physical table is going to change when you use something like this rapid hybrid in our hand, right? So we got a 3-lander here, a couple rat colonies. We see the Rush of Dread, which can be great for the forced sacrifice. I really love the idea of Secundi in this deck, allowing you to pay that 2 life and sack one of your rats just to draw a ton of cards. Could be really useful, right, in a world where you're going to get them in. So here we're missing that double blue for Curse of the Swine, but that's okay. All right, well, there's the double blue. So we're in good shape here, right? Let's see, we can get Vren in. If I play the Dark Ritual, then I have 6 mana. Would I do anything different with it? I guess I could hybrid right away, but it almost makes more sense just to get Vren out. And then remember, we only get a rat for our opponent's creatures that were exiled, not ours. So we don't really want to hurt our own creatures if we don't have to. But here's an interesting opportunity. We, on turn 5, if people have a lot of creatures, you could Dark Ritual into a big Curse of the Swine. Take out a bunch of things. If you have a good Rush of Dread target, go for it, right? Have opponents sacrifice a bunch of their things. Swarmyard's probably not the best yet. It is -5/-5 at the moment, which could be pretty brutal to our opponent's board. So, this is my line of thought right here. Something like these guys, or, again, Dark Ritual into that Curse of the Swine, and just go deep on removal. All of those 3 are sorcery speed options, so I would assume that we would do it. Again, the rat colonies are only going to be 4/1s because we don't make those rats until end step, and then we do that. We could, if we want to, this turn, if we're going to take the bunch of the removal, I kind of don't mind the idea of stationing up the Segundi. If we know we're going to go for a Curse of the Swine or a Swarmyard Massacre that's going to take out a bunch of creatures, you could put, 8 counters from the 2 rat colonies onto this. Just get it closer to, right, being able to go off. And then we come back to our turn, right? We hopefully have a bunch of those rats that we just got. And you could do the other route, right? If you Swarmyarded last turn, you could, focus on something like this. But I kind of probably would just tune up the Segundi with one of the rat tokens. You could sack one of the rat tokens to draw if you want to, but otherwise I think you just move the rats in and start attacking. Obviously, we have a bunch of sorcery speed stuff and not a lot of instant speed removal, but I think it's okay to be clearing the way for our rats at sorcery speed, right? To hurt our opponents and then get our rats in. But again, a lot of really great single, and multi-target removal here. So we've got a lot of options. I think even sacking one of our rats, that's probably what? If we made 3 or 4 last turn, they're 7s. Sacking one and drawing 7 doesn't seem like a bad idea either. Just getting more removal in your hand, more ways to use it. We also have counter spells, right? So I think you can start to see where this could get really good. But I think, Swarmyard Massacre is just such a good board wipe because it leaves all of our things up. And notably, if we Swarmyarded last turn, we could have stationed the squirrels into the Segundi, right? So there's other options there. 4, 8, 11 from Vren, 12, 13 from the rats. Or the squirrels could have made a ton of sense. Then Segundi would be online this turn. But I think you can kind of see the idea there. It just comes down to the functional when do you use what, right? On what on your opponent's board. Play to number 2, 4-lander here with that Roaming Throne. We see Soul Shatter and Innocent Blood. I didn't mean to do that, but the point now is we have a lot of things in front of us. Oh, Rat Colony just 1 turn too late. I would have loved to have played it last turn, but we'll get the Patchwork Banner in. What makes the most sense here? My thought was just Vren. We could hold up the... Oh, Innocent Blood is a sorcery. Oh, well, you come here. You could go Roaming Throne plus Innocent Blood, but that doesn't make a ton of sense because we'd have to give up either of them. So I think I'd play something like Rat Colony. Take the attack with Vren if you want to, but again, this one we're trying to build up our board a little bit. Now here with 5 mana, you could go make an example. You could go Soul Shatter. You could go Innocent Blood and we could sack the rat colony to hopefully get something from all of our opponents, right? And then, Soul Shatter as well. Remember, now because of Roaming Throne, you're getting double the rats, right? So now stuff like this becomes really good. Stuff like the Withering Torment isn't bad when you're destroying something and getting 2 rats for it, right? Um, maybe it's something like Innocent Blood on our turn to sack the rat colony, and we know we're getting, 2 to 6 rats, and then followed up with something like the Torment or the Soul Shatter on our opponent's turns, right? Because that's what we have the mana for. But again, now we're untapping with a bunch of rats, and we're just gonna try to run the board over with all these rats, right? I think this is really what the game plan is trying to be. And again, it becomes so dependent on the decks you face. If you're facing a token deck, well, you still want to use the removal. Vren's just not profiting it from it as much. Whereas if you're playing an Elf Ball deck or slivers or something where they're going to have a ton of individual creatures, this might not be a bad idea because you're going to hopefully get more. It just comes down to what archetypes you're playing against. And what's kind of nice about those Edict style effects is if your opponents are playing decks that rely on just a couple creatures like Spellslinger decks, hopefully you can really shut them down a little bit on taking their key creatures out right as you grow your board up. Playtest number 3 here, just a 2-lander. But we do have Dark Ritual, which can help us get Vren out. Note that everything in our hand is pretty darn cheap, so as much as we, I think it's worth it to keep and try to get another land. So you could go for the Command Tower if you want to leave Pongify or Hybrid up. But I think I'd rather not. I think I'd rather, that. My thought is, do you like Dark Ritual into Vren is kind of my thought. Because then, this turn, we have so much removal up, right? You could play the rat colony, hold up removal. You could hold up both pieces of removal. The only problem there is then you kind of have to force yourself to use it. I kind of like rat colony plus keep up one of the removals right on our opponent's turn. On back turn, Cover of Darkness, giving them fear. Remember, fear is only by artifact creatures or black creatures. We hopefully used one of the 2 of these. Use the other one this turn cycle, again, to get another rat. Maronar feels pretty great. Next turn, it's going to start turning those 5. We have 3 rats right now. Or, arguably we would have, 5 rats, I guess, if we use them at the right targets. So those are 5/5 rats. Sack one of them to get 5 more of them, which buffs all the other rats that care about it, right? So now you could start to see where Maronar is just going to really start ramping us up. It gives it fear, so does the Cover of Darkness. But again, the point is now you're in great shape. Again, we draw another piece of removal. You can play the Marsh Stalker. It doesn't really matter to me. Sack the one, make the more, and just start getting your rats in, getting them involved. Hold up the removal if you haven't played it already. You can use the Swarm Yard to try to protect Vren if somebody's going to destroy it. That's what the regeneration does. It's not going to stop exile removal. But I actually would probably posit that Maronar is going to become a pretty decent threat over a turn or two, just making all these rats, especially if you're going to grow the colony and the rats that Vren's making. But, I mean, the rats are going to become a problem eventually. And, you do have a world where you could hold Maronar up and sack Vren if somebody tries to get rid of Vren to at least make a few rats. But I think it makes more sense to sack one of the rats that Vren makes to make a bunch of 1/1s to grow all future rats that you make. And I think you can start to see here where we only saw single target removal. But I think if you only have single target removal, using your single target removal on the right things is what's important. I know that it's a blanket statement, and to a new player, you're probably going to be asking the question, how do I know what's the right thing? And the answer is you kind of have to look at the board state and determine what creatures are opponents are really important to your opponents. That's the thing you want to use your single target removal on. Or, if they have a card that, they don't really have much, but they have a creature that draws them a card every turn whenever a creature comes in or something. Get rid of that. Like, find the key things that are either helping to build their strategy up or their entire strategy has to go through, and those are the things you want to remove with single target removal. If you have mass removal, just let it go, right? Get your opponent's creatures out of the way and let our rats, deal the damage. Again, kind of quicker playtest, right? Because at the end of the day, we remove the right things or we don't. We kind of go from there. But I think it's still important to see, what the game plan is, right? Playtest 4 here, 3-lander. There's the Dark Ritual. We got 2 rat colonies and then Season of Loss. Remember that if we do choose the single paw mode, we have to sacrifice a creature as well. But can still be very useful, especially right once we get all of our tokens out, right? Because then we might potentially have some rats to get rid of. Here are my thoughts. Rat colony. If I do this and play a rat colony, my hand's safe. Now we got Vren on turn 4. There's the Russia Dread if you want to do that, right? Forcing your opponents to sack all their creatures. I don't know that I really want a Season of Loss unless I'm willing to give up the rat colonies for all the rats that I would get. Like, if my opponents all have 2 non-token creatures out, I would happily give up the rat colonies for, 6 of the other rats, right? So it's about using your better judgment on if it's worth losing or, right, if it's worth keeping. So you got Rush or the Season of Loss this turn. And you can always, crack that Dark Ritual to help you out with the mana, depending on what you want to do. And then there's the Infernal Grasp, again, more single target removal. But again, I think one of these well-timed is going to make enough rats to really make a difference on your board and hitting and hurting your opponents. And they're going to have those board wipes at the right time. Again, the Grasp is great, gives you 1 target removal at the right time, gets you one of those rats. But I think these mass board options are the ones that really matter in finding them at the right time and using them. Because then all those 1/1s are going to become, 6, 7, 8s that are just very hard to deal with. And the chump blocking is going to be forced on your opponents to not take the damage as you just try to find more rats, right, to go alongside them. I will say at the end of the day, this deck is the way we've built it is very reliant on Vren making you the rats. So you do have to be cognizant of the fact that your game plan is running through your commander. The thing that helps us out, or is going to help us out most of the time, is Vren does have Ward 2, meaning that your opponents can't just snipe you with a Swords to Plowshares for 1 mana. They're going to have to use relevant removal to take Vren out, which I think is a trade we're willing to take if we're getting all of this value right off of the other stuff. Important also thing to note is that Vren does not have to see the creatures get exiled. If you want the creatures to die, to be exiled, you have to have Vren out. But if you were to curse a swarm, curse the swine, and then put Vren down, I don't know why you wouldn't put down Vren first if you had enough mana. But if there was a world where a bunch of creatures died, or where a bunch of creatures were exiled, and then Vren managed to come out, you'd still take advantage of the creatures getting exiled. It's just Vren helps by getting those creatures that are dying exiled as well. I hate that the playtests are fairly short on this one, but it's just kind of the nature of the deck. You need to be crafty with how you use your removal at the right times to get your rats, and then leverage your rats in combat for some big damage. And that's the hope of something like Rat Colony, is it sits alongside those tokens, it becomes a great attacking threat, right? And then stuff like Maridar, I wish there was 3 of them, because those are the exact things we'd love to see. Getting more and more tokens and going wider and wider. But I'd love to know what you think of Vren down in the comment section below. Spider-Man starts next week. I'm so excited to start it, and I will catch you all in the next